Violence in the seat of American democracy. Passions inflamed by the president.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
We may know how we got here, but what happens next? Politicians on both sides of the political spectrum have condemned the violence, and many are calling for the removal of President Trump, who they see as responsible.
But I support invoking the 25th Amendment because he is a national security threat, and we need Republicans and Democrats to come forward and remove this man from office.
So what's the 25th Amendment? How does it work? And with just days left of the Trump White House, can it be triggered in time? The 25th Amendment to the Constitution was introduced following the chaos of President Kennedy's assassination in 1963. His successor, President Johnson, wanted to ensure a clear line of succession if the president was ever again incapacitated.
Even the best of government is subject to the worst of hazards. I will propose laws to ensure the necessary continuity of leadership should the president become disabled or die.
So what does it say? Well, there are 4 parts. Section 1 and 2 deal with the president dying in office and the appointment of a new vice president. Section 3 allows a president to transfer power willingly to his vice president. This has been done 3 times since the amendment was ratified in 1967. Once for President Reagan and twice for President Bush. All 3 times were so that the president could have a colonoscopy. But it's Section 4 that's important here. It allows for the removal of an unwilling president. Subject, of course, to certain conditions. So what are they? First, Vice President Mike Pence would need to be on board, as would a majority of Donald Trump's cabinet. If that happens, then Mike Pence becomes acting president. But that's not the end of it.
If the president objects to that, which it seems like he would, then it would go to Congress to determine by a majority vote of both houses whether or not they would uphold the cabinet's vote. But given that Trump is nearing the end of his term, basically the clock would run out. So essentially what it would mean if the 25th Amendment is invoked, regardless of what Congress does at the end, that Vice President Pence would take over the rest of President Trump's term.
So could this happen? Well, many senior Democrats have called for Mike Pence to begin the process.
In calling for this seditious act, the President has committed an unspeakable assault on our nation and our people. I join the Senate Democratic leader in calling on the Vice President to remove this president by immediately invoking the 25th Amendment.
And even members of President Trump's own party have backed calls for removal.
Here's the truth. The president caused this. The president is unfit, and the president is unwell. And the president must now relinquish control of the executive branch voluntarily or involuntarily.
President Trump's former chief of staff told CNN he would be in favor of the president's removal if he was still in cabinet.
You were a former member of the cabinet, and in addition to being a White House chief of staff, if you were in the cabinet right now, would you vote to remove him from office?
Yes, I would.
But despite all these calls for the president's removal, will it actually work? Well, maybe.
The 25th Amendment could be invoked today. You would just need to assemble in some form the relevant heads of the executive departments, which is what the Constitution says, and that's been understood to mean the cabinet. That could certainly be done today.
President Trump's term in office ends on the 20th of January, just a few days away, which does not leave Congress and the Vice President much time. But Howard Koh, a law professor at Yale University, says it might not be as complicated as that.
You don't have to invoke it. You have to tell him you're going to invoke it unless he just stays in Mar-a-Lago or the White House and doesn't cause any trouble for the next 13 days and then leaves quietly. And that gives a kind of leverage. A constitutional tool gives political leverage that obviously merely jawboning him or persuading him has not been enough.
There are many factions within the Republican Party still loyal to the president, despite the extraordinary violence in the Capitol on Wednesday.
And I'm telling you, as a Republican, I don't support an effort to invoke the 25th Amendment now. If something else happens, all options would be on the table.
And even those opposed to the president, like former National Security Advisor John Bolton, question whether pursuing the 25th Amendment will be effective.
That in 12 days he'll be gone, and that it's probably better to grit our teeth, to dig in against possible, or one might even say likely, abuses of power, rather than invoke enormous constitutional processes, the full effect of which we can't possibly judge.
So what does that leave?
It's ridiculous to suggest we don't need to worry and everything will be fine in 12 days. Honestly, I think he needs to be removed immediately, whether through impeachment and removal or through the 25th Amendment. But because if he somehow is convinced to resign, I think it would be a tragedy for him to be pardoned if that were part of the bargain.
The other method of removing the president from office, which we already know well, is impeachment.
The last time President Trump was impeached, it took over a month. But Elizabeth Wydra believes it may be possible before the 20th of January.
If we're talking about the president's incitement of the insurrection and attack on the Capitol we saw yesterday, the facts there are very clear. It would not take the House very long to drop those articles of impeachment, and the evidence is clear, and the Senate could decide very quickly what to do. Of course, that would require the Senate and the House to reconvene because they're both in recess. But when you have a constitutional crisis of this magnitude, that doesn't seem too much to ask.
Alternatively, there are those talking about pursuing criminal prosecution after the end of the administration. The president has reportedly been advised that he could be prosecuted for what was seen by many as an endorsement of the violent rampage through the US Capitol building. Can he use the powers of presidential pardon on himself? We'll have to find out. Less than 2 weeks remain. A lot can happen.